McKee, Euroopa rahvatervishoiu professor, on nüüd meiega ja kuulame teemal, miks on vaja ebavõrdsust vähendada ja kuidas seda teha.
It's a great pleasure to be able to speak to you today. I'm just really sorry that I'm not able to be there in person. Now, as some of you know, I am a regular visitor to Estonia. I've worked with Estonian colleagues for many years, and they include Maris Jesse and Matti Rahu from Tallinn, Katrin Lang and Kirsti Parni in Tartu, and most recently Anneli Uskula and colleagues in a fascinating project that is directly relevant to the work that you're talking about today, and this is on improving access to cervical screening in Estonia. And of course, I also had the privilege of working with Thomas Hendrik Ilves and the Pan-European Commission on Health and Sustainable Development. Now, you've asked me to make the case for action on inequalities, and in the next few minutes, I'm going to try to do so. I'm going to argue that there are three main reasons why we should tackle inequalities in a society. The first is ethical. It's the right thing to do. The second is economic. An equitable society promotes economic growth, and because it is equitable, everyone shares in those benefits. The third relates to security. In an increasingly uncertain world, with threats that you in Estonia are far too well aware of, equitable societies are more secure. And after I've done that, I will conclude by saying a little bit about how we can actually achieve more equitable societies. So let's begin with the ethical arguments. At its core, the ethical case for reducing inequality is grounded in the principles of justice, fairness, and the inherent dignity of all individuals. It's about creating a society where everyone has an equal chance to succeed and live a dignified life. Let's start with justice and fairness. Ethical theories like egalitarianism emphasize that fairness requires equal opportunities for all. And inequality often arises from systemic injustices such as discrimination, unequal access to education, and economic exploitation. So reducing inequality is seen as a way to correct these injustices, ensuring a fairer distribution of resources and inequalities. And then there's human dignity and rights. High levels of inequality can undermine human dignity, leading to situations where some individuals cannot meet their basic needs, while others enjoy excess. From a rights-based perspective, reducing inequality is essential to ensure that everyone has access to the essentials of life: food, shelter, healthcare, and education. Now, these are not just commodities. They are fundamental human rights. And third, there's moral responsibility and solidarity. Many ethical frameworks stress the moral duty of those with greater means to support those with less. This sense of solidarity suggests that societies should not permit extreme disparities, especially when they result in harm or disadvantage for the less fortunate. Reducing inequality aligns with the idea that we have a collective responsibility to care for one another, and particularly the most vulnerable. Now we move on to the theories of consequentialism and the greater good. Philosophically, from a utilitarian standpoint, actions should be judged on their outcomes with the aim of maximizing overall well-being. Reducing inequality can lead to improved public health, higher education levels, and reduce social tensions, something we'll come back to in a minute, thereby increasing the overall happiness and welfare of society. Fifth, we have the prevention of exploitation and the abuse of power. Extreme wealth and power imbalances often lead to exploitation and abuse. When a small group controls a disproportionate share of resources, they can entrench their position, often at the expense of others. Reducing inequality helps prevent exploitation and ensures that power is not concentrated in the hands of a few. And of course, this is something that we see, sadly, in many of the other countries that were once part of the Soviet Union and that have not been as fortunate as Estonia. Then we have reciprocity in the social contract. Theories related to the social contract suggest that societies are based on mutual agreements to live together under rules that benefit everyone. High inequality violates this sense of reciprocity, indicating that the benefits of social cooperation are not shared fairly. Reducing inequality is consistent with a just social contract where all members can meet their basic needs and contribute meaningfully to society. Then we have compassion and empathy. Ethical arguments also appeal to compassion and empathy, urging us to recognise and address the sufferings of others. When inequality leads to poverty, exclusion or hardship, there's an ethical imperative to act with compassion, to alleviate these conditions and to promote a more humane and caring society. And finally, in this section, we have the intrinsic value of equality, in this section on the ethics of addressing inequality. Some ethical perspectives argue that equality itself is a fundamental moral good, and this view holds that equality is inherently valuable because it reflects respect for the moral worth of all individuals as equals. Now, of course, I'm aware that the ethical arguments, while really important, and particularly for those of us in public health, may not cut through to others, and particularly those who do have the power. So we need to look at other arguments, and I'm going to turn now to the economic arguments for reducing inequality. There are strong economic reasons to do this because it can enhance growth, stability, and the overall efficiency in the economy. Let's start with economic growth. High levels of inequality can hinder economic growth by limiting the purchasing power of a large portion of the population. Remember that when Henry Ford started to build the Model T Ford, he paid, in the 1920s, he paid his workers well because he wanted them to be able to afford the cars that he built. When wealth is concentrated in a small group, consumer demand is suppressed because the wealthy save more and spend proportionately less. Reducing inequality increases disposable income among lower and middle income households, stimulating consumption and driving demand, which fuels economic growth. Now, economic policies are also related to the inputs into growth, and particularly human capital. Inequality often leads to underinvestment in human capital, particularly in education and healthcare for lower income populations. This results in a less skilled and less healthy workforce, impeding productivity and economic potential. By reducing inequality, societies can ensure broader access to education and health services, enhancing the skills and productivity of the entire workforce. We also need to think about the ability of the labour market to function, and this means increasing economic mobility. High inequality can create barriers to economic mobility, where people born into poverty have fewer opportunities to improve their economic status. Now, this lack of mobility can result in a misallocation of talent and resources because many individuals cannot reach their full potential. And we need as many skilled, talented and healthy people in the workforce as possible. So reducing inequality improves access to opportunities, leading to a more efficient allocation of talent and resources. Another economic argument relates to the social cost, the cost of providing welfare. Inequality is often associated with increased social problems, such as crime, poor health and low educational attainment. And these impose significant costs on society, including higher public spending on healthcare, welfare, and law enforcement. Reducing inequality can lower these costs by improving social outcomes, leading to a healthier, more educated, and more stable society. Inequality can also contribute to economic instability, leading to financial bubbles and bursts, driven by the over-accumulation of capital by the wealthy and the underconsumption by the majority. By reducing inequality, economies can achieve more balanced and sustainable growth with fewer extreme cycles of boom and bust. Now we have the issue of aggregate demand. A more equal distribution of income enhances aggregate demand. Lower income individuals are more likely to spend their additional income compared to the wealthy, who are more likely to save it. And this increase in aggregate demand can drive higher production, higher investment and job creation, contributing to a more robust economy. Reducing inequality can also contribute to fostering innovation and entrepreneurship. Countries that are unequal stifle innovation and entrepreneurship by limiting the access to capital and resources for those potential entrepreneurs from lower income backgrounds. Reducing inequality can level the playing field, allowing more individuals to pursue innovative ideas and entrepreneurial ventures, driving economic dynamism and creating new jobs and industries. And finally, tackling inequality can prevent economic and political capture. Extreme inequality can lead to the concentration of economic and political power, where wealthy individuals or corporations influence policies in ways that protect their interests at the expense of broader economic efficiency. Reducing inequality can help to ensure a more competitive and dynamic market environment. Now, the third set of reasons for tackling inequality relate to security. High levels of inequality can undermine social stability, increase conflict, and pose threats to both personal and national security. High inequality is often associated with higher rates of crime and social unrest, as disparities in wealth and opportunity fuel resentment and frustration. Reducing inequality can alleviate these pressures by creating a more inclusive society where individuals feel that they have a stake in the system. Inequality can also create fertile ground for political extremism and radicalisation, as marginalised or disadvantaged groups may be more susceptible to the messages of extremist movements. My colleague Jacob Bohr showed how it was the areas that were left behind in the United States that shifted in 2016 from voting for the Democrats to voting for Donald Trump. We showed the same with voting for Brexit, and in earlier work we showed similar phenomenon in Weimar Germany. So by addressing inequality, societies can reduce the appeal of radical ideologies and diminish the recruitment base for extremist groups, enhancing overall security. Inequality erodes social cohesion and trust. And trust, as we heard in the Tallinn conference that I was involved in December of last year, and again, thank you to the Estonian Ministry of Health for all of their work in helping to organise that. Reducing inequality helps to build stronger social bonds. It increases trust among citizens and fosters a more resilient society that is less prone to internal conflicts. Finally, we know that high inequality can increase the risk of civil conflict and insurgency, because groups that feel marginalised may resort to violence, as we saw on January the 6th in Washington, and challenge the status quo. Reducing inequality can reduce the root causes of these conflicts by promoting greater inclusion and creating more opportunities for peaceful political engagement. Now, what can we do about this? If we're going to reduce inequality effectively, a comprehensive approach is needed, and this involves economic, social, structural reforms. Now, some of the policies, and you'll be talking about all of this today, I'll just pick up on a few of them. Progressive taxation and redistribution. A progressive tax system using tax revenues to fund social programs can directly alleviate poverty and reduce income disparities. Education is so important, and particularly education of very young children. Ensuring universal access to quality education from early childhood all the way through to higher education can level the playing field and reduce educational inequality. Healthcare is, of course, important. Universal healthcare systems that include everybody can reduce health disparities closely linked to economic inequality. And of course, we know that just because a service is free and widely available, we cannot assume that the inequalities will have disappeared. You are well aware of the inequalities that exist within Estonia. I, from my work with my colleagues I mentioned earlier, I know something about it, but you're the experts. But we all know that there are wide inequalities even now in Estonia. Wages, income, labour rights. Raising the minimum wage, protecting labour rights can ensure fair wages and reduce income inequality. But we need social safety nets for those who are disadvantaged, those who cannot work. Expanding social insurance, targeted cash transfers can provide immediate relief and reduce poverty. But above all, we need inclusive economic policies. Policies that promote job creation, support small businesses and foster entrepreneurship. All of these things can reduce unemployment and economic inequality. So let me conclude. Reducing inequality is not just a moral imperative. It's an economic necessity, and it's a security strategy. By addressing inequality, we can build a fairer, more prosperous, and more secure society for all of us in whatever country we live. Thank you very much indeed.
Aitäh, suur aitäh!